Peace and Bulavinaka, and greetings from the Pacific Conference of Churches, and welcome to this webinar hosted by the Pacific Conference of Churches in partnership with the World Council of Churches as part of their Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace. Our theme, Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace in the time of COVID-19 in the Pacific. And I'm James Bhagwan, the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Churches. The Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace focus for 2020 was the Pacific. And groups were supposed to come from member churches of the World Council of Churches down into the Pacific to address and engage in a pilgrimage and pilgrim team visits across our region. And learn more about climate change, about nuclear legacies, self-determination, indigenous people's rights, the struggle on gender-based violence, the challenge for young people. It was supposed to be a year of engagement with the people of the world coming into the Pacific and engaging with this part of the world that is often neglected. And then COVID-19 hit the world and, of course, eventually reached our Pacific with borders closed. And with the exception of a Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace reference group and theological study group visit to Fiji in January, a visit from the Church Commission of International Affairs to Australia, and engagement very briefly on nuclear legacies. Not much else was able to take place. This year we had to have a hybrid eco-school. And so this webinar is an opportunity for the participants of the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace, the theological study group, the reference group, and our members and friends from around the ecumenical movement around the world to listen to some stories of the challenges that we face here in the Pacific. And while, of course, there will be a focus on COVID-19, for us in the Pacific, it is important to recognize that COVID-19 must not overshadow some of the key issues that we continue to face in our region. Climate change, a global problem, but particularly affecting the Pacific. The issues of self-determination for West Papua, for Maui Nui, French Polynesia, for Kanaki, New Caledonia, for Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, coming out of Papua New Guinea, and of course the other issues around self-determination, economically, socially, culturally, the decolonization process that is ongoing in our region, the challenge to address geopolitical agendas, and also closer to home, issues of church and society, the issues of gender-based violence and protection for children. These are many things that continue to engage or to happen in our region. Some of these things are exacerbated by COVID-19. And so in our talanoa, in our dialogue, in our webinar today, we will be engaging in this. But first, as is our way as a community of faith gathering, we dedicate this time to God and to God's people and places by a prayer which will be led for us by the President of the World Council of Churches, President for Oceania and
as we come together,
the Reverend Dr. Meliana Pulo,
for the purpose of the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace, especially during this time. We do look to the Lord because we find it difficult in our world today with the pandemic of COVID-19. I would like us to contemplate on Psalm 13 as we start our prayer. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart all the day? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? consider and answer me. O Lord my God, enlighten my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my adversaries will rejoice when I'm shaken. But I have trusted in your loving kindness. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Father God Almighty, as we begin our meeting, we do look to you. It is not very easy to think and work towards justice and peace in our world, especially in these days. But we do thank you that we can still count on your many blessings that you have promised to us, especially in the Psalm 13, where we can claim that your loving kindness will endure even our days when we lost our hope. But we do thank you that we can still trust you. You are God Almighty. You will come through. You will save us. You will heal our world. And we can still continue to count on your many promises. Father God Almighty, we thank you very much that you are our living God and you will answer our prayers. Please help us to take our journey in the pilgrimage of justice and peace. Always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Meliana. We are grateful to be joined today, both online and through a greeting sent to us today by one of the deputy secretaries, or deputy general secretaries of the World Council of Churches, Isabel Firi, who visited Fiji in the only PJP pilgrim team visit by the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace Theological Study Group and Reference Group early last year. And we now invite her to share her message and her greetings.
I bring you greetings, from the World Council of Churches, especially on behalf of the Acting General Secretary, Reverend Professor Yuan Sauka. In our common pilgrimage of justice and peace, we are part of one body in Christ. We are bound together as one humanity on our planet. The suffering that each person feels in one region or one family impacts all. The joy and successes of one are also shared by the others. In this process of reflecting on our pilgrimage of justice and peace in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, we have conducted similar consultations with the regional ecumenical organizations in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and Asia. We share the pain, we celebrate the successes, and we strive for transformation by the grace of God with hope and courage. As we also look forward to listening and discerning the input from this meeting, I want to share briefly some of the insights we have received from other regions. In Africa, the pandemic amplified the humanitarian problems on the continent and disrupted life and the livelihood in community in many ways. All forms of violence, especially directed against women and girls, were shown to be on the increase. The pandemic was also evidently impacting mental health, especially among the youth. The role of pastoral ministry, and especially the ministry of the presence, was undermined with the limitations of visitations to the sick, the dying, and the bereaved. In Europe, it was clear that COVID-19 disproportionately impacted the poor and vulnerable communities, such as people with disabilities and Black and minority ethnic communities. The pandemic also pointed to long-term consequences for young people and lifted the significance of mental health, economic consequences, and the widening health inequalities. In Latin America, the pandemic deepened the inequalities in societies and enhanced political polarization within nations. The pandemic also further eroded the already fragile existence of indigenous peoples. There were significant impacts on child rights and protection and the welfare of migrants and refugees. Humanitarian aid has been disrupted, and peace-building efforts have also been hampered. In Asia, they have highlighted challenges related to vaccine distribution and hesitancy, the impact of gender-based violence directed at women and girls. They also looked at the rights of indigenous tribal community, militarization, and authoritarianism. Lastly, they examined what it means to face threats to livelihoods, mental health, and unemployment, especially among the youth. In all regions, the churches have lost several leaders and members to the pandemic. Pastors, along with other essential service personnel, are under tremendous strain, requiring support and accompaniment. But this pandemic has hastened the application or use of social media technology, especially in delivering sermons, thus keeping the church's mission alive under challenging circumstances. In all regions, churches and their ministries have shown resilience as they have continued providing their ministerial and diaconal services amidst the pandemic. Families have more time together at home, and many reports indicate that family prayers and fellowship have become more defined. It is going to take time for the world to recover from this pandemic, and we cannot continue life depending on our old patterns and solutions. These tragic circumstances have to be overcome, and our communities are showing the way forward to the transformation. Let us listen keenly, learn from each other, support each other, and respond in solidarity and in a timely manner. This process also continues in other regions, namely the Caribbean and North America, during the months of June and July. Let us build up our knowledge and wisdom with compassion and empathy as one body in Christ to overcome this crisis. I thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Our format for tonight, and we will be going over the usual 2-hour limit for a PJP webinar for our friends from the World Council of Churches, is a form of storytelling and dialogue, the full scape of Talanoa. Tonight, we will begin with the first session, the first mat that will be rolled out where we hear 4 stories from people of faith working in our region, addressing the challenges of COVID-19, addressing the issues of gender-based violence, and addressing the issues of self-determination. Our first story comes from the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Papua New Guinea. The leader of that church, Bishop Dr. Jack Urame, will speak to us and share his story on how the churches are dealing with COVID-19 and how, apart from the pastoral work, there is that challenge to maintain the prophetic role of the church on a number of development issues.
At the moment, because we are also very much challenged by COVID-19, things are not the same, you know, life patterns are changing, and even in some places, church attendance are also declining because people are afraid to come to church, and you know, mass gatherings are not allowed because of the fear of, you know, spreading the virus. And so we need to follow all the protocols. So the pattern of life in the entire church is very much changing. But despite of that, even the church continues its mission. And there is also worship live on worship days. And also we continue to encourage family worship. You know, taking into consideration that, you know, when people come to church, you know, they are tempted to, you know, be close together, sing and pray, and, you know, they try to do the normal way. And that is why we need to also observe the protocols, but to continue to encourage their spiritual life so that the worship life, the culture of meeting and sharing must not, you know, be stopped despite of the COVID-19 challenge. For that reason, I can say life still goes on, and people are, you know, finding different ways to renew their, you know, their life and, you know, their connection to Jesus, and to also keep alive the, you know, life of prayer, and, you know, and also meeting others so that they can continue to share their faith and their witness to Christ. At the ecumenical level, the leaders of the churches are also meeting regularly to discuss about ways to continue to encourage, you know, the work of the churches so that we continue to survive, you know, in these difficult days. Pastors are doing really, you know, a good job and trying to keep the congregation life alive in some of the places, especially in urban areas. There is already a difference between the urban, you know, church communities and the rural church communities. In the rural communities, people are not so worried because, you know, they just live as, you know, normal, and they come to church and they don't observe the protocols, you know, too much. But in the urban communities, you know, a lot of people are observing, you know, protocols, and so it makes a big difference. But generally, I can say the church life is still, you know, going on, and the mission still continues despite the challenge.
You've spoken about the pastoral work of the church, you know, and the challenges that you face right now in the context of COVID-19. What about the prophetic role of the church? Because I know you're a strong advocate of justice, particularly not just in terms of human relationships, but justice with the land. You know, you've been quite strong in the issue of making sure that the church has a prophetic voice in society. How hard has that been in the context of COVID-19?
Yes, James, that is one maybe area that, you know, we are strongly, you know, supporting and trying to help our people to understand what it really means. To be a church in society is not that easy because I think we are facing, you know, a lot of challenges, you know, from different angles. And so we continue to raise our voice as church, mandated by God. And we believe that, we are mandated by the gospel. And so that is why I think we have this role as a prophetic, a role to play in the society. So we encourage our people to be connected, to the people, to the land, and to the sea, because in those, difficult days, what can people do? They have to go back and, try to make their connections, and to cultivate the land, to produce as much as what they can, and try to survive on those, the strength of the community and the strength of the land and the strength of the natural environment, because COVID-19 is challenging the old dynamics of the capitalist system, hanging on the market economy and also the cash economy. For that reason, we see ourselves as God's people living together, sharing and caring with each other. So our encouragement to the people is always to see themselves also in this situation, see themselves with their relationship to God, so that they must not lose focus. People, because of this challenge, people are finding different ways, because it is the question of survival. And that's why I think our own, Pacific philosophy of, interrelatedness, I was in the front line trying to advocate this, and I said to our, congregations, I said, we now have to see, ourselves in the old dynamics of this challenge, our connectedness to our, forest and to our sea and to our rivers and to our people are so important, because we depend on each other. Because if the market economy, if the cash economy collapse, we have no other alternative, but we have to depend on, the strength of our relationship. And so this is the kind of message that we continue to give to people, so that people must not, lose hope. People must see their strengths in the, the blessings and the resources God, gives to us. And so that is one, I think, important area. And so I was giving this message, and people, I think, some do really appreciate, and some do really appreciate and see themselves in the old picture, of this, COVID-19, to define again what it means to be, humans, what it means to be, a church, and what it means to, continue to, uphold our values of, being together and sharing their life together.
Thank you. You've touched on a very important issue also. The extractive nature of, I guess you could say, what we refer to as the neoliberal economic agenda. And this push, cash economy, given that many of our countries have an economic, there is apart from the spiritual and the social economic impacts of COVID-19, there is also an economic aspect. And we have heard some development experts that they tend to come out at this time and say, the key to the recovery, the economic recovery of the Pacific is in the ground or in the sea. And all you have to do is get into the extractive industries, and you can, regain that lost economy. And this, I guess, becomes a challenge, particularly in a time where, because of COVID, you're not able to have the dialogues with government or civil society. How do you see the role of the church in addressing these issues?
That is a very critical issue, and I went on the media several times already, and I spoke on the radio to reach out to the rural communities, to inform them of what is really happening and the dangers of, losing our resources, and the danger of being really, affected, if this extractive industry, is really going to be very strong, affecting the livelihood of the people. I also went on to our, daily newspapers and even, made some, remarks to help people to understand the danger beside, what they really experience, in their daily lives. So for me, I try to take the leading role as a leader of the church to give the relevant information to the people, to see, the negative impact of the extractive industry, because we have already experienced, our river systems being polluted and our sea being polluted, the marine life being affected, and also the trees gone through massive logging and even, a lot of, the natural, ecological system are being disturbed in many ways. And so I travel a lot into the bushes and I have seen real, destruction happening. And therefore, I try to, provide those information to the people so that they realize, the danger the extractive industry, brings to our society and to the whole region. And also the impact it has, not for this present generation, but also for the future generation. So our message for the people is to continue to help them to protect, their land, to protect, their bushes, to protect their, sea. And, there has been a lot of, even campaign going on because the government, is also, with the developers to try to, extract things from the resources, and people who have been campaigning against, and the Lutheran Church, including myself, we were in the front line and saying no, we cannot continue to support this extractive industry concept because the impact it will have will be massive. It has already has impact on us, and we have realized, and so we need to give a different message so that people must see themselves between the value of being human connected to the environment, and also between the value of money. And we keep telling them money comes today but will be gone tomorrow. But our well-being, being human and living on the land is so important. So we have done some public forums and consultation already, and we also have given them even some message, to the public, so that the public becomes aware, not only on the church, but also to the wider community in the society. So this is, for me, a very critical area, because our people, these days, they are really, interested in money, and they don't see the danger, beside this. And that's why when big, multi-billion companies come in, they try to see it as a means to, being rewarded with money, or rewarded, in terms of, modern civilization. And that is when we try to give them, a different story of development, so that they see themselves in this whole picture, and try to promote and also maintain their own, dignity, as well as their cultural values and social values.
Thank you, Bishop. I guess in the current context with COVID-19, and now PNG is not alone. We have French Polynesia, or Maui Nui, also affected by COVID-19. Fiji, increasing number of cases as well. We've heard a lot of concern around the issue of what they call vaccine hesitancy, people being afraid or not convinced of taking vaccines. How do you see the role of the church in the practical response to COVID-19 in helping reduce the impact of the pandemic in your country?
Yes, James, there's been a lot of fear, among the communities. And because people receive, different messages about, the vaccine, Because of lack of, proper information, people have their own interpretations. That is why fear is increasing among people. And when the vaccine was first introduced to the country in Papua New Guinea, that prime minister was, one of the, leading, figures, being, injected with the, vaccine, and trying to give the message to the people that, it is safe and, it is for our protection. So everyone should get this one. But because, people also receive all kinds of information from social media and from other people and from other sources as well, they have, different interpretations. The church leaders, they are sharing the same, kind of feeling, and they met several times already, and then so they try to give a solid message to the people that the vaccine is for the good of every individual and even the society. So everyone has the choice, and whoever wants to take it, must be willing to take, because it is protecting us. But some people have their own reasons, because people come with all these negative stories about the negative impact of the vaccine. And so as far as I can see throughout the country, many people are still afraid, and they are not willing to take the vaccine. That is when the churches are very strong in trying to give the relevant message that we encourage people. We encourage people to see the vaccine as a way forward, for people to prevent themselves from being infected. It is a safety measure. And so this kind of message, there are different churches in the country, and different church leaders are, taking active role and giving out this kind of message. A couple of days ago, a couple of church leaders met. I was not part of the team because of my travel, but they met, and then they all agreed, and I gave also my support to them that, we will encourage our church members to, receive the vaccine because I think it is for the common good. For that reason, we are also, taking the front line and giving out the message together, supporting the government.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for what you've been able to share. Perhaps in conclusion, if there is one key message that you wish to share with your sisters and brothers in Christ from around the world who will be watching this webinar and this interview, what would that message be from the Lutheran Church in Papua New Guinea to the world at this time that we're in? What would that message be, Bishop?
Thank you, James. Because COVID-19 is changing the whole dynamics of our societies and even of the global community, my message is to redefine ourselves as humans and to see ourselves together in the context of the whole human community. Because Jesus said, love God and love your neighbor. And there is no principle that is better than love itself. And so in the whole context of the COVID-19 challenge, we need to redefine ourselves as church, as Christians, our connectedness to God and our connectedness to our neighbors. That for me is a very important value. We don't see ourselves as individuals, but we see ourselves, in the context of our relationship with others. In that way, the challenge that we are facing, we will be able to stand together as people of God and respond together as people of God. And that is where we find our strength. That is where we find our comfort. That is where we encourage one another to continue to remain focused and to continue to journey together into the future with hope and with trust in God.
Thank you, Bishop Jack. From Papua New Guinea, we come to Fiji, and still looking at the issue of COVID-19, how the humanitarian impact of COVID-19 is seen, particularly in the context of Fiji. Joining us for our next story is Vani Ratanasinga, who is the Executive Director of the Fiji Council of Social Services, someone who has been engaging in the civil society space for some time before coming to EFCOS, and with her team has been engaged in the humanitarian response to COVID-19 when the pandemic first reached Fiji last year, and with the new outbreak that we are currently experiencing with now over 400 cases in the last 6 weeks. She will share her story and experiences with us now.
Yeah, it's been non-stop work for us. Last year around April, when we were asked to support government's risk communication outreach in various communities. And then just as we were rolling into that, and then TC Herald happened around, I think it was around April, May. So, and if you understand the sort of work that also in disaster response, first you're in response and then you go into recovery, and then you combine that with having to respond to a pandemic that came in and just, really crippled our economy. The work, you really have to have a clear idea about how you're supporting people in these extraordinary times, I guess. And yeah, for EFCOS, I guess, one of the things that we think that really helped us to cope a bit better and to respond as well to communities that were needing help was that in 2019, we had received some support to strengthen our roots, our membership. And majority of them are, community-based organizations. They are women's fellowships. We have the Catholic Women's League, who are members as well across the country. We have neighborhood groups, we have youth groups, and the 2019 was just focused on rebuilding these structures. So when 2020 came around with the pandemic and with disaster, we had the opportunity to test some of that. So some of the structures that we had activated around 2019. And as I speak now, last year was it was a flurry of activities. All my staff was, they were all out there helping. This year, believe it or not, we are a bit more relaxed, and a lot of the staff are here. They're just mobilizing resources, sending out. So the logistical support is what we're concentrating on, while the DCOSs, the District Councils of Social Services, where our clusters of membership affiliates are the ones that are doing response right now. And it's a bit better this time. There's a bit more coordination. Local people are leading the response, and we're learning to sit back and listen and take our cue from local leaders. So that's been I guess the growth for EFCOS in this between last year and this year.
We talk a lot about resilience, and in our region, we like to say, because we still maintain our indigenous knowledge and wisdom and many practices, that helps our resilience. You've used a concept of sautu, in your work as FCOS, relating to well-being, relating to how the community supports each other. Could you share on that and how that's supported communities with the economic and social impacts of COVID-19?
SOTU is the term that I'm familiar with, and I'm being part of a community that that uses SOTU as a coping mechanism, as perhaps a concept for communal care. Yeah, that's been. I mean, that's something that has come up in our networks about how we can build a community of, perhaps a community of practice, but it's really about those safety nets that have not worked, particularly with government having to take care of all of these needs. Some of it, you've read in the papers, you've seen on social media, the criticisms that there are huge gaps in the system. We're really falling back on something that's never been acknowledged in formal spaces, but we're trying to use that because there's just not enough money to go around to build these systems and to support this, the need that's emerging from various communities. So, and the best thing that we can go on is beyond money, beyond finances, but talking to principles or values of a community and building on that to provide sort of that, to plug the gaps, if you like, to plug the gaps in these times where, just the systems that government had put in place are inadequate in some spaces or in some places. So SOTU for us is and I know this exists across the concept of SOTU is, it may be okay, but I know that the same concept exists across different cultures. I know that people will also pull on this, but we've used that to try and encourage communities to stand in the gap and to provide care for those who really don't have that access to God. And this is essentially what the DCOSs have been doing. And we were really using this time to, we've identified this as an opportune time to begin to talk about rethinking development models. And so too for us is a starting point, not the end, but it is the starting point. And I think the focus now is to invite others to add to this idea, to bring perhaps things from their culture that resonate with SOTU, and for us to build sort of a new model, forge a new pathway. Yes.
So what would some practical examples be in the context of how you've seen this manifest itself in the communities?
So, we've had, we haven't really pushed it out, but, our DCOSs in the different districts, they've been distributing food, ever since the what do you call this? The lockdowns, not the shutdowns, but the lockdowns. They've been distributing food, and they see also that there is that struggle with their government counterparts at the subnational level, where they need manpower to do contact tracing, mass screenings. In Nosori, we have 18 of our members or Nosori DCOS that are working with the government teams to do that mass screening. So, these little acts of kindness, the care economy that's happening in Lotoka, where they've said, okay, we can mobilize some food packs. So they had mobilized some food packs to distribute, and private sector partners have come on board to donate more, because they can see that the networks that the community volunteers through the DCOSs have is quite grounded, and it reaches grassroots communities that often get sometimes often get missed out in food distribution systems of government and other partners.
You spoke about this idea and something that Pacific churches and regional groups have been talking about for some time, rethinking development and where COVID has placed us, exposing our perhaps over-reliance on things like tourism, etc. And the big push we see to rush back to some kind of normalcy, but still we have these challenges. What's your take on that?
I just think that this is an opportunity to demonstrate courageous leadership, and that means departing from some business as usual. And if you really looked at it, there's ideas and innovation that's with our people, and if we just take the time to listen to some of it and to observe, these things are happening already in communities. I think that COVID-19, this second wave, has handed us an opportunity to begin to give them ideas to transitioning people, transitioning from this capitalist economy or economic model to a people's economy, where our bottoms-up approaches, so where we're really looking at how people can drive some of our recovery, as a country. We're looking at agriculture. We're looking at, this morning I was in a discussion on technology, innovation, and just building on cultural practices. For me, it's really about creating the space to listen and not being tokenistic about that space, but really listening to some ideas. They don't, people who are doing this kind of work at the grassroots level, they don't speak policy language. And so the spaces have to be enabled to listen to, narratives that may not fit into the mold, but they give us some great ideas for transitioning to that sort of an economy that conserves, that that doesn't really just look at natural resources as a commodity, but something that we can build on to sustain future generations, not just this generation, but future generations. So yeah, this is why FCOS is focused on SOTU, because SOTU also has that that has that sort of facet that speaks directly to natural resources. Yeah? So when people say SOTU, they think about abundance of fish, abundance in our oceans. So this is why we've been keen on pushing this narrative on SOTU. Mm-hmm.
I see an important shift taking place from a culture of scarcity to reclaim our culture of abundance. Given the place that faith communities hold in Fiji and of course in the wider region of the Pacific, what do you see as the role of the churches and other faiths during this time, and particularly in partnership with civil society?
I I joined FCOS in 2018, and when we started going into revitalizing our roots, one of the things that I quite clearly did was that a lot of those who do community work, a lot of those who do volunteer work, do so because they are compelled by their faith to do so. And I think that's that's something that the churches can be appreciated for. And I think that it's not something that you do and then you leave, but the church also plays that accompaniment role to communities as they put their faith into action. So I think at this time, the role of the church doesn't change. They have a prophetic voice, and a lot of what we do, the world that we envision, comes because of our interaction with leaders and the work that they do to promote the kingdom of God, I guess, in that sense, to believe in a better world. That's really why a lot of, at least in the FPOS networks, that's what I see is coming through. They engage because this is what God has compelled them to do, and that's something that's connected to the work of the church. I think they can continue to play that and affirm people as they begin. It's going to be a difficult journey. It's going to be a long one. And sometimes they don't exactly have the words to articulate the struggles and to perhaps, support others who are suffering. So that's probably where the church can continue to have a role, but also to that, the church needs to speak truth to power. I think they should play that role quite clearly because, a righteous leader, for me, is important, particularly in the protection of human rights and in protecting those who are vulnerable and looking after the weak. Lots of things. I have a wish list for churches. But yeah, I mean, I think, there are people out here doing that work. So to continue, even as simple as praying, dedicating, specific dates in the calendar to praying for people who work out in communities, volunteers, NGOs, and even our leaders, because this burden is a burden we all share. And until we have righteousness from the top down, we can continue to see more suffering.
Finally, Vani, what would you say your biggest learning has been as a result of the pandemic?
What would be my biggest learning? Yeah, for me, the biggest learning is in letting go, and ultimately to know that, there are some things we cannot control, and what we can do, we should do. And I'm quite humbled to see that our members are doing that in FCOS and through the DCOS networks. And taking one day at a time, I guess, for me, it's really that. And, many times in the DCOS networks, in our forums, we've talked about trusting that God is still in control, even though things seem to be going haywire. So that's been the biggest lesson. Last year we, just jumped right in, tried to resolve this and that. This year we are learning to let go of things that we cannot control, to focus on helping people. We know that there are politics involved, and we try as much as possible to stay away from that, but to address, persistent policy issues that might prove difficult for those needing support. But as much as possible to focus on what we can do immediately to help people in need. So that's been our lesson so far.
Thank you, Vani. Joining us next with her story is Reverend Sarah Bird. Reverend Sarah Bird is an ordained minister of the United Church in the Solomon Islands and also serves as the Pacific Conference of Churches ecumenical animator for our Just and Safe Pacific Communities of Women and Men program. Particular focus is on the issue of gender-based violence and gender equality. Reverend Sarah has been working both at national level with church leaders, with church communities, and working with pastors, and right down to working with young people and at school. So she brings a wealth of experience on this issue, and also sharing a perspective from the Solomon Islands, where she is currently based, until we can get her across to join us here at the Secretariat in Suva.
From the Solomon Islands perspective, because of the COVID-19 is manageable, it's controlled. So therefore, the impact of COVID-19, especially in regard to domestic violence or the rise of violence against women and girls, is not really a problem over this side. There are stories, there are cases such as rape and other things regarding domestic violence, but it's like a normal thing. That's how I see it. It's like a normal thing that's happening within the Solomon Islands because of the mindsetting and the behavior of the perpetrators, or of some of the men that want to cause violence to women and girls and children. But I don't think it's the effect of COVID-19. That's how I see it from here. Maybe in other places, yes, but over here, because of people are still free to move around, there's no lockdown over this side. So the cases of rape and domestic violence is still happening, but it's not really the impact of COVID. It's like a norm, and it's like what's happening. It's been happening since the past years, even before COVID. So it's still happening.
Thank you, Reverend Bird. Your work at PCC is as the ecumenical enabler for a just and safe Pacific communities of women and men. And the issue of gender-based violence, both physical violence and structural and all forms of violence against women and girls, has been something that you have been working on for a long time. Can you tell me how what shifts you have seen within the churches, particularly in the Solomon Islands, with the work that you have been doing around gender equality theology, and working with church leaders and with communities? What is the current stand or shift that you see in this work?
Thank you. Yeah, since I came to the Solomon Islands, since I returned from Fiji, the first target that I tried to work with is the church leaders, and I'm focusing on the ministers and their spouses. And my aim is that for this gender-based violence is become the church ministry. So it's part of the church ministry within the Solomon Islands, with especially United Church and also SICA member churches. So since I came, that's what I've been doing. I was running workshop together with my husband to the ministers and their spouses, so that both of us can be role model to the ministers and their spouses, for them to be also take the ministry as it's part of their partnership ministry within the church. So that's what we've been doing. And we covered with the United Church, we covered most of the ministers. I think the last region that we are going to have the workshop is in 2 weeks' time. So that's the last lot of ministers and their spouses. When we did this, I can see that before the ministers were kind of shocked with this. They thought that it's this work is always an NGO work, but since we work together, they accept this ministry, and I see that they start to preach from the pulpit, and they also started to like during counseling, they focus on this domestic violence, and especially those who are victim of violence against this violence against children and women. Yeah, so for the church leaders, that's what happened. They accepted, and we are all in this ministry together. And because of our law in the country, which is the Family Protection Act in 2014, and Children and Family Welfare in 2017, that is part of the law of the Solomon Islands. So we are all together in front line doing the work together with the government to help, especially to decrease this violence against women and children.
And in this work, I note that we see the role of the church and particularly the theological aspects as strengthening the community and perhaps going a few steps ahead of where the law is. Would that be correct in terms of how we are called to relate to one another as male and female within the community, within the home? It's taking it to another dimension, perhaps.
Yes, that's right. As we always emphasize to our participants and to those people who are working with, that this gender equality is not about, many people thought that gender equality is a women thing. So we encourage them that this is not about women. It's not about women's right, or it's not about feminist movement. Gender equality is about a family. It's about women and men. It's about boys and girls working together, making sure that men and women, boys and girls enjoy the fullness of life, enjoy each other's presence, enjoy the freedom that God gave. As when God created the world in Genesis 1, and at the very end of his creation, he was relaxed and he was, saw the creation and say that it was very good. And therefore, and now, we see the world, what's happening. Is it very good? So how can we make it very good again, the way that God intended the world, to become, instead of, domestic violence, looking down on others or hating each other. So how can we do that together as men and women and as boys and girls to fulfill what God intended right from the beginning? So that's how the church and how the communities here are looking at it now. We are all working together. It belongs to the families, belongs to boys and girls working together to make sure that everybody enjoy the freedom and everybody enjoy each other's presence, and also the presence of God and also the environment as well.
Thank you, Reverend Bird. Still on this work, so you've shared about the shift that you've seen within the church in which you serve as an ordained minister of the United Church of Solomon Islands, one of the PCC member churches, and the fact that this work has become a ministry of the church. So it's not something being done by outside now, it's being internalized into the life of the church. You also mentioned the Solomon Islands Christian Association, and I know that you're also working with SIFGA, the Solomon Islands Full Gospel Association. How do you see this work on addressing gender-based violence, and particularly looking at it from the perspective of gender equality, the call from the churches? How do you see that going what do you see as some of the challenges still to be overcome in your work?
Thank you. Yeah, while we are working together as a team, or while we are most leaders are on this, on board in this work together. At the same time, we also have some kind of challenges, and the challenge is that some of our churches, they are still very much male-dominated leaders. The leadership is still very much male-dominated. Some of our churches in the Solomon Island, they still don't accept women to be ordained. Maybe, while we are still working in this, maybe when right times come, maybe it's going to be, when they bring it up in their meeting, they're going to accept women's ordination. But there are some other churches that they still think that women, still not allowed to be ordained. And this work still belongs to the men. So that's some of the challenges that we are still facing. Regarding our community, they still think that the man is the head of the family. They still think that the man is still the boss in our community. So this is other challenges that we are still facing. And because of that, we are still, so we also go into schools, into our secondary schools and also primary schools, so that we are also targeting so that those new, the children will have, they already aware of what is especially with the violence against children and what is the cause of it, and especially with their changing their behaviors and mind settings, so that they will have a better future, that they are writing their history today for a better future. So that's what we are focusing now at the moment as well.
I think what you've just shared on taking it to the next generation, the children in high school, this need for an intergenerational shift, because we see that this is a long-term issue, and that the challenge is, of course, to change mindsets gets more difficult as people get more entrenched in that mindset. So you've mentioned the legal aspect with the family law legislation and the legislation in the Solomon Islands, the role of addressing this from a theological perspective. That leaves one other aspect, and I think you've touched on it a little bit when you talk about engaging with the school students. But the other aspect, which is still very, very strong in our region, is culture. And what's the challenge in how do you respectfully engage on this issue, addressing the cultural challenges that may impact the work to end violence against women and girls?
Yeah, that's right. Culture is also one of the contributing factors to violence against women, also children, especially when talking about the roles that, women's role and men's role. So with our, with the work that we are doing, we never miss the socialization process and the impact of these roles that contributed to violence against women, especially when they don't do their job as what they thought that it's the women's job, when they don't cook, and when the men came home and there's no food, and then that's where violence begins. So we also try to highlight it that those are just gender roles. You can share those roles together. The only roles that you are having is that a natural role that you're having, that it's a God-given role, is those biological role. That's the only role that belongs to women, and that it's the only role that belongs to men. All other roles, that gender roles that given by societies, it can be shared. So yeah, so that's how we also deal with culture, and especially the social structure that, you know, giving roles to men and women, which really always trigger the violence against women and children.
Thank you, Reverend Bird. You've really underlined the role of the churches and the work of theology in social transformation, and in this context of gender-based violence. You're speaking to me today from Munda in the Solomon Islands, not far from the maritime border between Bougainville, the Solomon Islands, etc. I mean, Papua New Guinea, etc. How with the current outbreak of COVID-19 in the Solomon, in Papua New Guinea, and coming closer to you, what are the challenges that you feel at the moment in terms of the need for vaccination? What are some of the things that you are seeing in terms of hesitancy?
Yeah, thank you. At the moment, the first thing that the government did is to send our security to go and look after, secure our border at Shortland, and that's where the aim emphasis, you know, is happening until now. I heard that some Australian and also New Zealand, they also send send some of their army to go and join our boys and, you know, looking after the border. So that's what's happening. But even though it's, you know, that border is very much secured as far as we were concerned, we are still very much, you know, communicate with our friends in Papua New Guinea. So for example, just when this week, when we're in Wonunu, the Bishop, Reverend Abraham Toroy, called. So we had a good discussion with, you know, and also we encourage each other especially in the work and the ministry. Before COVID, we always travel and visit each other. So for example, when we had an assembly meeting in 2019 at the border in Shortland Island, the delegation from Bougainville also came over. Now, because of COVID, they hardly came over, but we continue to communicate with them through phones and emails.
So you continue to provide that one, the ecumenical relationship, but also the pastoral relationship at the same time, despite the border challenges. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we find in our region across when we have these cases. Our cultural connections can sometimes be our strengths, but also can be challenges as well, because we need to maintain those relationships, and not everyone has access to technology. Maybe a final comment from you as we, this reflection on the pilgrimage for justice and peace. What does justice and peace mean for you as a woman, as a theologian, as an ordained minister of the church? What does, in the context of eliminating violence against women and girls, what is peace and justice for you?
Thank you. For me, as a theologian and as a minister in the church, peace is when you enjoy your life, you enjoy the freedom that God gave you, you enjoy the abundance and the blessing of life that God gives you. And not only you enjoy it, you know, as a person, but you also enjoy it with all other creation. You enjoy it with your fellow brothers and sisters. You enjoy it with your families, with your communities, and you are free to, you know, to speak out your mind to them. So that's peace for me. And when you speak your mind, they also accept it. You are kind of listen to each other. That's peace. not only to human beings, but also to the whole of creation, to the environment. So peace is when I'm really stressed, and then I just, go to the bush and sit there alone and look at the trees and meditate on that, when the leaves falls down, and when you hear the sound of the birds. So that's peace for me. Justice. So peace and justice, it goes together. So justice is when somebody is, hurt, and when somebody can't say anything because of the depression, or maybe because of something that make them can't talk, and you speak on their behalf. So that's justice for me. So you are talking, not only you speak out, not only for that person, but you also speak out for the environment. You speak out for the children who need to go to school, but they can't go to school. They have been neglected. So you speak out for them. You speak out for those that are vulnerable. So that's peace and justice for me.
Thank you, Reverend Sarah. Our final story today on this mat is from Kanaki, known to many of you as New Caledonia. Kanaki is in a process of self-determination, going towards its third referendum for independence from France. And our member church in Kanaki is a Protestant church of Kanaki, New Caledonia. And joining us from Kanaki is Pastor Billy Wetewer, a young pastor who studied in Fiji at the Pacific Theological College and is currently working back home in Kanaki, and will share the stories around engaging on self-determination during these challenging times.
Our current situation here with the COVID-19, since 2 months now, we are COVID-free. So our government, in partnership with our religious leaders and customary leaders too, cultural leaders, managed to work again for the containment for the COVID-19. So regarding the action of the church and pastoral work on the field, when we were affected by the COVID-19 at the beginning of this year, same as last year, the church decided to close all of their places of worship. So we were not able to worship in our temples and to do meetings with the church leaders and the parishioners. So yes, we were frozen for the time of the COVID-19 here in the country. What we saw is that for some, they were able to use the electronic, technologies to have some time and space of worship on Facebook or other on Zoom, also to have the meetings on Zoom. So that's what we see new from last year. Last year we were not able to do that, but this year we see that the church start to adapt with this situation of the COVID-19. So this year, yeah, we for some we were able to organize this fellowship on the medias, but it really affected the work of and the life of the church on the grassroots level. So we had a really good response back from the grassroots people about this platform that some of us were able to organize on Facebook or to share the word of God on this media. Yeah.
How about in terms of the role that the church plays in its prophetic voice, particularly the socioeconomic impacts that COVID-19 would have had on its communities, and of course with the process of self-determination also going on in Kanaki. How is the church engaged?
Okay, but before we go to that, I just would like to highlight something about the church on COVID-19. Last Saturday, the church executive organized a morning information about the vaccine, the importance of vaccination. It was presented by an eminent doctor from the Institute Pasteur in France, in collaboration with the local doctors here, Wallisian and Kanak, who gave this informative session on the importance of vaccination. Because we saw that even though we are COVID-free, we saw that the local population is not rushing for the vaccination. So this is because we are COVID-free, and maybe because also there is some uncertainty about the efficiency of the vaccine and its side effects. So they organized this informative session with this medical expert, and the general speech that came out from their meeting, it was that it's better to prevent that cure, and also on altruism, like I vaccinate myself to protect the other, and if we do nothing, we don't participate you participate in fact in spreading the virus. So the church now is engaging in this, and I would like to thank you again and the PCC for our meeting last time, because that was the starting point of the wake-up call maybe for the church to really do something on the information prevention about COVID-19. So in August, we will have our general meeting, and they are planning again to organize this session of information about the importance of vaccine with a more broader assembly, with the ministers and all of the delegates of the church who will be there. And they are also planning to maybe organize also a vaccination session with the population there. So yes, I wanted just to mention that about the some of the position that the church now is taking about the vaccination and its importance.
Has that been a challenge in sharing that information, or the response from the members of the church when they hear this coming from the church, from church leaders?
So from now, it's just the church exec who has the access to this information. So we are waiting the General Assembly in August to spread more the information with the people, the population. And I think it will have a more important impact on the people if it comes from the head of the church. So they will see that our leaders are also taking part in that. So maybe they will also follow after that.
The current situation in Kanaki, particularly with the referendum, challenges that you have politically right now with the government.
Right.
How has that impacted your work as the church, or added to the work of the church in this particular time because of COVID-19?
Yeah, okay. For us, here in the church, the position of the church has always been the same since we began our struggle in the 70s. In the 70s, as you may recall, we publicly take position for the independence and the freedom of the Kanak people here in the country. So that was in a particular context. The situation has really evolved now until now, but the church is still promoting this fight for the freedom of the people here. We have a really complex situation with our government, and last week some political delegation from our politics here went to France to discuss the outcome of the referendum. If it's yes or no, what will be the outcome and the position of the state regarding this third referendum. And I just heard today that they also choose a date for the third referendum. It may be, I'm not sure if it's sure or not, but it may be at the end of this year in December. And this is really, I mean, personally, I'm not sure if it's a good decision to have choose this date for December for our third referendum. The thing is that from the independentist parties who are here, not everyone went for the discussion there in France. So we already see that there is there is no really agreement between the independentist party here. So they were, some went, some didn't, and they came back with this date for the third referendum. So I'm not really I'm not really in peace. I will say like this, peace with how the independentists may react to this third date. So in all of this, what's the work of the church in that? I may say that it's more the executive, I mean the head of the church who are really pushing forward for that to get more engaged with the politics. But I am also scared that the position of the church is may be how will I say that, too much on the Kanak people. Like we are a church, we need to point out what the political system or the economical system are doing to our people here. And when I say our people here, it's all of the human beings who are here on this. But because of the stand that the church has taken in the 70s, I see that the church still stay on the side of the Kanak people. But like I said, a lot of things have evolved. It is true that there is still some discrimination here, but I think the church needs to be more open all of the ethnic groups that are here in the country. Like, I am scared if the church discourse become more politicized, more and more politicized in engagement with the politics like this. But we are trying to do a lot of work on the grassroots level to open up to these challenges of the political situation that we have, and also the economical situation too. Yes.
You've mentioned a very important issue, because, as you know, within our Pacific household, within our region, we have Kanaki, which is perhaps the most furthest along out of the territories and countries that are still struggling for self-determination, with this third referendum now coming up. We have Maui Nui still listed in the C24 for decolonization, but still a long process. And of course, West Papua, which has a big struggle for self-determination ongoing now, and continued oppression. But you mentioned something very important. You talk about the need at this time as church, that pastoral understanding of caring for all. And
yes.
yeah, and the need to engage in nation building, the role of the church in building the new nation.
Yes. Yes.
How do you see that playing out? How do you see the church doing that? What would you like to see happen?
Okay. So first of all, maybe I will mention that we are starting a process of rethinking who we are as a church, of rethinking what we are doing now, and we are starting to see some and I think that's also the one outcome of the COVID-19 in the reflection, is that we are starting to see re-emerging again the interest to and the importance to look back to our culture, and what concept, what way of thinking we need to retake from that to maybe adapt to this new situation that we are now. We, as the church here in New Caledonia, the Protestant church is maybe 95% composed by Kanaks. So we are trying to rethink how we can bring more of our culture in the way we're doing things in our life in the church. And I am really glad, because I see that it follow what is happening in the region, in our reflection, in the regional reflection on the importance of our culture. So we are trying to go this way, and going this way, it's not to get ourselves from the others, because we need to regain a good understanding of who we are as people from here, and we need to do that before. I think that's my understanding of the process. We need to really get a good understanding of who we are before opening ourselves to the other. So we don't we don't fall into this game of influence that we can have when we meet with other cultures. So we need to really reaffirm who we are, and to be open to the others, and being open to others, welcoming others is really part of our culture too, not only here in in Kanaki, but also in all around our region. Pacific people are really open to welcome the foreigners, and we always give them places. Or the thing is that in our history, we never did that. Time and space, we never have this this time to sit together and to maybe welcome each other to share like this. So maybe in the process, what I would like to see, it's really this space of coming together to share our history, like right now. And that's maybe the what we have seen since the two last referendum, is that the communities really stay in their own boundaries. There is no connection with the others like this. So maybe one of the things that church the organize is kind of space. When I can meet with my brother from Tahiti or my brother from Wallis to share our history. I know my suffering. I know the suffering that my people have like that my people have through the history. But I may not be aware of the suffering that the other one in front of me also had because of this colonial history. So what I would like to see this space of safe space for everyone to share what this colonial past has done to each other. And maybe we will see that the one that I'm looking like this is has also suffered because of this history, and maybe in sharing this history will come together with a new way. The question that I'm thinking here is like, it's not to say if you want to become independent or not, but maybe it's really to ask this question: if do we want to live together in this country? Because we are so in our ethnic groups, do we really want to live together? And the economic system that it's applied here in Kanaki, like everywhere else in the world, is really but making, like, it's really making grow the gap between our communities like this. So we have different style of life. So some want to live like Europeans like this, like and the Oceanians people want to live their way of life. So we have also this tension that's coming in the process too. But yeah, I want to see this, that more platforms, more debate, more discussion between our communities here, our people. But what I see from our side, I mean, from the Kanak people, it's like even though in the constitution of the French, even though with the Nouméa Accord, our culture is recognized, but it's hard to see that in the life that we have together as a people. So I'm thinking of how we can bring down what has been speaking at this international level or discussion like this, how we can bring this down to be at this level of relationship with the people like this.
There's the process of decolonization is
That's right.
not just political, but it also is about community. It's about the mind and the spirit being decolonized as well.
Right.
Yeah. As we look to the next 6 months, if the referendum is in December.
Yeah.
What are some of the key steps you would like to see happen with the church that you could imagine where we take things forward?
Right. I will speak at my level. I know that at the higher level, like the executive of the church, they will try to accompany the population toward this. But what I can say, because I'm working also with the youth here in the church, and I see a really powerful potential in the youth and also the artistic movement. So if the referendum is really going to happen in December, I maybe through the youth and through the artistic movement that we have here, maybe we can really organize something like this, like festivals or maybe platforms of discussion, of debate around this issue. What we were thinking of is to organize some debate with historian who will come to talk with the youth about this past history, and to help the youth to open their mind to the situation that maybe other youth from other ethnic groups are facing too. Right now, we never met together. I mean, with youth from other ethnic groups, we are always in our own youth group like this. So I would like to maybe see that happening between now and December, if the referendum is happening in December. Maybe the youth and the artistic movement, cultural movement can really bring this space of discussion and debate toward this issue, because we really need to break these mental barriers that we had. And I think that learning our history, our colonial history, not only from our side but also from their side, is really important to help in breaking the wrong ideas maybe that we have sometimes about the other. So yeah, maybe I'm thinking more of using the youth and the artistic movement to open up this these platforms of discussion and debate.
Merci and Vinaka, Reverend Billy, for that reflection and that story. We have concluded sitting on this mat and listening to these stories, but what has been shared will resonate now into the next conversation. We take these thoughts and these stories to the next mat that is gathered, laid out by Mr. Netani Rika, who is the Communication and Development Projects Manager at PCC based in Suva. He will be facilitating the next session, and joining him on a virtual mat from their own places and perhaps their own mats, in our Pacific way. If this was done without the restrictions of COVID in Fiji, we would have gathered in a place together. We might be sitting on a mat, and we definitely would be having some of our kava as we have this next Talanoan engagement. But welcome to Maureen Penjueli, who is the coordinator for the Pacific Network on Globalization. Siale Ilolohea from the Pacific Islands Non-Governmental Association. Piango, she is the executive director. Joey Tau, representing Young Solwara, our youth activist. Petro, who is an intern on our ecumenism program at PCC as a young voice. And from the Council World Mission Pacific Office, the Pacific Mission Secretary, Reverend Nicotemo Sopepa. So now I hand over to the Master, our facilitator for the next Talanoa and Dialogue, Netani.
Can we begin this session on justice by asking Maureen? Maureen, what are the issues that come through when we talk about justice in a time of COVID?
Good evening, and thank you, Netani. Thank you, PCC and World Conference of Churches for this invitation. I think a lot of the issues have already been highlighted by a couple of our panelists in the first MET session. But I think it would be really good just to reflect pretty quickly in the context of the pandemic, is that it's really exposed quite deeply the kinds of fractures that perhaps we knew before the pandemic, but the pandemic has made it very, very clear. It's made very clear that we've got a broken economic system, a system that really privileges the wealthy as opposed to those who are more vulnerable. It has definitely exposed the ongoing failures of governments in particular to prioritize the very basic things like access to clean water, which is really quite fundamental to addressing the pandemic itself. And yet we find that for a lot of our people, particularly in urban, peri-urban areas in the Pacific, access to water has become quite critical. The lack of access into things like health care and services, these have been really exposed in the pandemic. Our government's immediate response has been to close borders as a way to protect our people. So I think it really just exposes that we are operating in a very fundamentally flawed economic system. And if we couple that with every other disaster that we're facing, particularly the climate disaster, it just really pushes us to reconsider the kind of world we want to be living in.
Do you think it's also exposed the weaknesses in our development models and shown that we are communities which have become quite heavily dependent on government rather than doing work for ourselves?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think in the context of the Pacific, our over-dependence on, say, tourism, and this is particularly critical for countries like Fiji, Vanuatu, Samoa, the Cook Islands, when close to half of your GDP is dependent on tourism, and that goes within a day, that disappears. Its impact, both in terms of revenues, job losses, have been quite significant. So I think the over-dependencies on certain types of development models seem to be the answers for our countries. So in the case of PNG, Jack Orame really spoke about mining, the extractive industry being quite critical in that particular development model. And again, these over-dependencies of these models that are dependent on extraction, tourism, that's been shown to be quite detrimental at this particular point in time, with workers' revenue streams erupting or disappearing, evaporating quite quickly, and governments increasingly turning to taking more loans and putting our countries at further risk in terms of what our future generations have to pay back.
Thank you, Maureen. Siale, you have members across the Pacific, Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. What are the issues coming through in terms of justice from the membership and from the people of the Pacific?
Thank you, Nitani. Similar just to what Maureen, I think my addition is just recognizing that the kind of services that has been highlighted by COVID um, is the non-recognitions of informal sector in a lot of our government system. And this has come out quite clearly when you see the kind of a recovery plan that government had, where there are funds that goes to businesses, there are funds that goes to different sectors in terms of how they cope with the COVID, close down uh, during some of the time in the initial cases last year, where government had put aside funds to support different sector. And across our region, they go back to what they call a registered system, where small businesses that are registered, they have allocations. And we find that all the civil society, all the community-based organizations, that they do have staff. They also have to go work from home. We're not part of that list. So a lot of our members in the different countries has really worked very hard to push for the informal sector. Um, small scale farmers included, associations of fisher folks, all that their livelihood were is much affected as much as the businesses. So you still see what Maureen was sharing, that COVID-19 was just came along. The gaps within how our government had recognized our development in terms of who are the key players that they were investing in. Obviously, the informal sector has not been a priority. And we have seen the shift from social protection system in how we prioritize our national budgets, for example, in a lot of our Pacific countries, has been highlighted by COVID. We have seen a lot of our um, hospitals, rural hospital, community-based hospitals that are often, basic services like that were vacant for years. There has not been any nurses or any doctors, and so when the close down of those urban to rural communities, those services were not active enough to respond to communities that has often have to travel to main cities to get those kind of services. So just addition to that, Netani, we have seen, and I hope that this kind of conversation will trigger the discussions that some of these gaps are not where we're already with us before COVID. So when we are talking about recovery, these messages and these uh, issues need to be highlighted. And I think that we talked about making sure that we start to shift from dependency in our government. But I think at the same time, we still need to push for government to reprioritize. And maybe this is the time that they should look into the development model that they've been using, which really dominated by how the donor countries and the global development agenda being set. Winakanitani.
Nakasiale. In Fiji, we've seen the gaps which exist. Vani made reference to them in the earlier segment, and we've seen in the news in recent days of the sustained attack made on Friend, a civil society organization based in the west of Fiji, which has been distributing food and other relief to members of the public who are in need. Does this point to what you have been talking about a need for government to engage more with civil society and in a more effective way? And that in some cases, civil society is actually more effective on the ground than some government departments.
I think this is an ongoing, I would say, a kind of relationship that government and civil society will always have to deal with and civil society sector will always face with that. But I think it's come down to how government is in their thinking define what civil society is and their role. And so we have seen government expectations of civil society is just to support, complement what they're doing in terms of implementations of program that's fit into the agenda of the government and the priorities identified. And they're comfortable with that. When it comes to advocacy, when it comes to civil society raising voices, when it comes to issues that they realize that need to shift the priorities of government or need to, this is when the things that we have seen now play out in Fiji. But I think the more we need to talk about what exactly is the role of civil society. And the role of civil society is both. We support government to implement, but government should also recognize that they need the enabling environment to, to listen to some of the learnings and some of the issues that are being put forward by the government. I would just say that perhaps our approaches at some point from civil society need to be relooked at. Maybe there would be more of a way of just mutual discussions, sitting down in a way of, because this has always been how we do things in our Pacific. We know different ways. We know how to approach the churches. We know how to approach certain different sectors. And I think this is probably where we need to relook. And I'm saying we, our civil society sector.
Thank you, Siale. If we can go to Reverend Nico. Taltala, what changes do you think the church can bring about to ensure justice in these times of COVID-19? Justice for the people.
Thank you, Ned. The church command the attention of the people in the Pacific more than the government or any other organization. The government may speak to the people in the villages once a day or twice a day, but they are not there except for the civil servants who are present for various reasons. But the church is always there, commanding the attention of the people. It's there throughout the week. So the role that the church played in ushering in justice into our communities is very important. On the other hand, the church must be open-minded, be ready to change, and also be ready to challenge itself, challenge some of its stances, challenge some of its teachings, so that it can become everything to everybody. Last week there was a Facebook post of the Fiji Muslim League distributing food in the Nambua area. The churches have been praying, and I shared that post, and I said faith in action. So it's not just sitting at home in our containment areas praying. We need to put feet on the words that we utter every day in our prayers and meet the people where they are. I think that is the contribution that the churches can do throughout the Pacific, especially places like Fiji and Maui Nui that has been ravaged by COVID-19. And also listening into Vani, speaking, like I said, the church should be opened to be taught, and also to realize that the prophetic voice is not confined within the peripheries of the church. We must be ready to accept the truth that sometimes, and most of the time, the prophetic voice comes from outside the church. We must listen to CSOs, to NGOs. It may come from the youth. The prophetic voice of the church, to speak prophetically in such a time as this, the church must be willing to accept that a prophetic voice or prophetic voices can also arise from outside the church, and also not confined to the Christian belief. So you see, we have a collective effort. I'm speaking about our collective effort as people of the Pacific to fight injustices and to ushering in peace and justice in our communities. Thank you, Ned.
Thank you, Taltala. We have started to see in Fiji on social media now people talking about the church taking money from people in good times. And now the people need money. The church is still praying. When does it become time for the church to stop being prophetic and actually become the hands and feet of Christ, performing miracles to those who need food and other things?
Yes, we are doing a lot of rethinking, and there's a lot of re's. We reweave, we rethink, we reimagine, re-envision a lot of things in our attempt to decolonize our ideas, our theologies. I think we should also begin to rethink the way we do church. The church exists for the people, and the word church itself, it means the gathering of people. So it's there for the people. It is not separate from the people. It is not a separate entity different from what people do in their daily lives. The church should be there, mudding its hands, dirtying its hands. This idea of righteousness and sin, I think sometimes we take it to the extreme that we separate ourselves from the people and the reality that of the life around us. The church should be there. If there should be an institution that should be more dirty than anything else, it should be the church. It should be there, filthy. You know that when we speak about holiness, it's not just about being clean. It's also about getting yourself there, dirtying your hands, tending to the people and their needs. That's the church. That should be the way the church should. I mean, that's the way the church should be. We should rethink the way we do church in the Pacific.
Thank you, Taltala. If I can ask Joey. Joey, what are the issues coming through from the young people of the Pacific? For you as a mentor to young people, what are the justice issues affecting young people during this time?
Yeah, I think just drawing, and thank you, Netani, thank you, PCC, and maybe just drawing back to some of the national issues that you've had from your members, and including Vani, and as highlighted by Maureen and Siale, some of the challenges that are coming, and I just speaking from observation that young people are faced with, or one of the largest population groups, which is our youth, is this closing up of spaces, be it the arts or these spaces for public discourse. With COVID, with the pandemic, some of these spaces have shifted from a face-to-face to a more virtual spaces. I'm speaking from the experience of Papua New Guinea, who recently held a public online consultation on its gender violence policy, which there was no representation of young people, only a few people that attended this consultation. So it's such cases like that where you have that had provided less opportunities for young people to engage in policy spaces. Also, there's this increasing number of unemployed youths, and the opportunity where a lot of them are now not able to complete studies, some of them are forced to go home, and the opportunities around job security. Most of our youths are looking at other initiatives, and I think Vani had highlighted some of those when she was talking about the case here in Fiji, that some of their members or their communities are faced with. So I think there are a lot of issues that young people are faced with. It's a big concern because they remain one of the largest population key groups in the Pacific. And I think it's a struggle for our Pacific governments as to how do we create opportunities for this growing number of highly skilled but unemployed young people. How do we continue education opportunities, but also being in mind, how do we engage young people in public policy discourse spaces?
Thank you, Joey. Are the churches still in touch with the young people, or have they lost touch?
I think and I bet your role is what your question would be along the lines of what can the church do? And I think the church has been around, has played an important role. I think the church has an important role because it reaches the masses. It has the ability to reach its congregations, its larger groups. And apart from preaching the sermons and being theological and having the spiritual nourishment, I think the church has a role to play for the suppressed and the, like what Vani said, those that are suppressed or those that are going through human rights abuse, and just bring it back to a regional experience. And I think the churches have, what we're seeing with young people in West Papua, that the churches has been a voice. With COVID in West Papua, you've seen usually a few years back when there's suppression, when there's heavy presence of military officers in West Papua, you would see university students mobilize either in Jakarta or West Papua. But with COVID and having all these restriction protocols in place, it stopped public demonstrations. It stopped the opportunity for young people to gather creatively and voice their concerns. But it's really good that the church in West Papua has become that voice, not only within West Papua, but it's becoming an international voice and a regional voice for the current struggles in West Papua and the young people.
Thank you, Joy. We can go to Petro for a moment. Pete, if I just go back to that question to Joy. Are the churches still in touch with the young people, and do they know what the young people want and how the young people feel?
Thank you, Nick. I think my answer will also be in line with Joey's answer in that, and the other participants' answers in that this was an issue before COVID. And I think the fact that youths don't have that space within the church systems to speak out on these issues is something that was a problem before the lockdowns, before quarantines. There was a very strong effort in some churches to really talk to the youth, to find out what the issues are and how the church can address them. But I think taking away of spaces due to COVID is kind of worsening that divide between the church and the young people. We spoke this morning with some of the youths from the interior and, that were part of the eco school, and they were talking about how the youth that were forced to move back to the rural areas, to their villages, were forced to now find themselves in a kind of state of lethargy, where are stuck at home for long periods of time. They're doing farming, but there's kind of like a listlessness with not knowing what to do or knowing what the future will hold. And I think the church has a very good opportunity to address those issues from the onset. Not gonna.
Net, you're on mute. You're muted.
And can you hear me now?
Yes.
I apologize on behalf of my family for the dogs barking in the background. But his home is theirs too. So I hope that you welcome them into your home as we have welcomed them into ours. We've been speaking about justice issues which affect the Pacific, most recently young people, and the role of the church. If I can come back to Maureen. Maureen, do you think it's time for the church to rethink its position on justice issues in the region? And if so, how?
I think I think that the region as a whole has endured injustices. So there are historical injustices that I think the church is doing it's playing a very critical role at this particular point in time. For example, around self-determination, the church's role, and particularly the Pacific Conference of Churches, in maintaining and accompanying these kinds of historical issues is really quite critical. It's the same with the outstanding historical issues like nuclear testing, which, if we look at it that way, there is progression and the role of the church has been quite clear. It remains one of the most significant voices on particularly supporting the agenda on self-determination. It's doing other really good work around economic justice issues, but I think it needs to transition pretty quickly into the kinds of actions. And I just want to talk a little bit about the church is probably in this part of the world either the second or the third largest landowner in the Pacific. And I just remember it's almost like a symbol. In every village in the Pacific, at its center is the church. It has played this significant role in terms of disasters, in terms of people's spiritual lives. So I think in that same way that the church is built as a center of communities, it can extend this in terms of resolving very basic needs that its people have right now. And I think we need to think very carefully about things like access to land for food security purposes right now. I was really pleased to see PCC with its garden, and it was a really good garden, but I think that's some of the things that it can duplicate pretty quickly and the church can do effectively. I think that the point about the Muslim League community distributing in Namboa, you would see that even in faith-based schools, a lot is being done just to assure food security. So I think that in the same way, disaster, when we look at climate change or flooding or cyclones, where the church is at the heart of community, I think it can transition that very well in terms of being the largest landowner and starting to address very basic needs of people, food, it can, that can turn into livelihood opportunities for the wider community, and it can give people purpose in life, particularly at a time when people are desperate for that. So I think these kinds of initiatives, particularly the resolution of economic injustice, I think that still needs to be more in terms of demonstration by the church. But if the church is still doing fundamentally important work in the region to resolve these things that, what I call enduring injustices, which we still have to do. And I think the church has carried a significant portion of that role in the Pacific. But that would just be one proposal that I think could be quite good, taking from the role of the church in centers of community.
Thank you, Maureen. If I can just take from there to go to Siale and ask Siale, is there a possibility here for collaboration between church and CSOs in the use of land and empowering young people, our women, and bringing about food security in this very difficult time? How can churches and CSO and traditional leaders work together?
Thank you, Anitani. I don't think that there is any problem with that, and we had seen that in some of our countries, lending some of the church's land to community for very short crops, for example. We see that in Tonga, where the National Council of Churches had moved in to support, plowing and some of those giving tools to farmers to come together if they don't have access to land, particularly on communities that most of them had moved in from the islands, and so they do have land for extension. Don't have any land for agricultural purposes. So I don't think that that's any problem with that. In terms of humanitarian, for example, we have seen the facilities of the churches mainly the evacuation centers, and the church are really very supportive of that. In terms of injustices, I think the church, the areas that I still see that the church need to perhaps invest a little bit more is how they deal with the psychological impact of some of these crises in the life of young people, in the life of their members, because that's an area that the church has not been. I would say that perhaps there's a role that they had not played before, or it's something that they need to invest more in. How they respond to domestic violence in their community. So we have seen a lot of work with PCC, for example, working with some of the regional NGOs in promoting that work. I don't think it's reached down to our national level as much as should be. And perhaps that I would like to see a lot of that being offered in some of our Dala school in some of our national level. There are other as we talk, and as Maureen mentioned, there are historical injustices in some of the church's role in our communities, and one of that is how they manage the church funds. And that has been something that has been pushed by some of our civil society for the church to look into, the financial management as part of a bigger role for the church, because it does play a role in peace and maintaining security in how the community trust the church in their role. because this is the time when we have to see community having trust either in the church or either in our government system. And so perhaps that's where we don't really just need to look at the church in terms of their church role, but much more broader in terms of how does the church play its role in a more broader developmental lens. Because as we have seen, very true in Tonga in particular, that the traditional leaders are no longer in our communities. They are residing in the main cities. But who is it that are really part of the leadership team in our communities are the church leaders. And I think they do need to play a role in a broader sense of community as a whole, but not just the church. But that's the role that's interconnected. We have seen in some of our communities, the major landowners are the church because they own a lot of land, and how they use that land to support COVID response is play a critical role. Thank you, Netani.
Thank you, Siale. We have a question from Reverend Jin in Geneva, I believe. If I can paraphrase the question, it's that in Europe, COVID-19 has brought about a new phenomena of young people coming forward to volunteer and to work together in the COVID response. Is this the same for the Pacific? Give that question first to Joey and then to Pete to say a few words. Are we seeing a crop of new young Pacific people coming through in the response to COVID-19?
Maybe I could just draw that back to Vani, but also the Reverend from earlier on. I think COVID has created the current working way of operation in COVID. The current situation that we're operating in COVID has provided the situation for leadership amongst young people. So it's increasingly, again, to speak from the experiences of Papua New Guinea, you have not very much volunteers. We're so used to living in extended families where villages in provinces are able to mobilize resources among young people. And it's some of the young people who have been taking initiative when a province or a village or district gets into lockdown. You've seen young people who have gone ahead and led initiatives around barter systems. You even have the current cardinal who is from East New Britain in Rabaul, leading one initiative with the youths of this particular, the Catholic Church. So you see a lot of leadership and initiative from young people, but it's not seen as this whole volunteering or what others might say. It's a new, as the question said, it's from Europe. You have a wave of young people now stepping up to say, I think in Papua New Guinea, in the Pacific, we're just so used to living in extended families. So it's not seen as that. It could be seen as that, but it's just families getting together, communities, villages, just mobilizing young people who are also taking the leadership. So I think it existed, and COVID has just brought the opportunity to amplify such initiatives that have already existed.
Thank you, Joey. Pete, in Fiji, do you think young people are paying more attention to national issues now through COVID-19, or are they taking a more informed approach to helping the country, or are they even taking part in the COVID relief effort?
To answer your question, yes. I agree wholeheartedly with Joey about the context being different between the Pacific and the European approaches to volunteering. I think some youths have taken agency where there's a need especially for villages and communities where there's a lot of travel. They've taken the agency to set up recording stations for all those visiting and leaving. Even across the street from where I live, there's a apartment complex, and very early on, when before the lockdown started, they had the youths from the different households within the apartment complex coming together, not really having any leadership, but having like a mutual agreement that they would take up that mantle to do that for the community. And I agree with Joy that it's something that I don't think technically you can state as being volunteerism. As for
let me put it this way, Pete. Young people taking the initiative to pick up roles that they didn't perhaps step into before within their village community, within the area of providing relief, labor for relief effort.
I think so, yes. There's also, you hear stories of youths coming together to support disabled members in the communities, the elderly. There's also a push, there's more of a push from younger people in terms of getting people to vaccinate, pushing out information about vaccination and maybe relieving of fears or misinformation that's going around online about the side effects or whether or not the vaccine was a product of Satanism. But these are all things that I think, youths have taken the initiative. They see that there's a need for people to be speaking out on these things and to be doing these things, and they're taking up that role.
Thank you, Pete. I'm going to ask Reverend Nico. There's a question coming through on what is volunteerism, or what is a volunteer in the Pacific? Is it an unpaid role? Is it youth being told what to do, or in some cases in the Pacific, do we volunteer the youth? Do the elders volunteer the youth to do something? Taltal, if you could throw some light on that. What is a volunteer in the Pacific?
I think volunteer in none of its sense is somebody who willingly, without being told or pushed, willingly take up a role, offering service, whether to the community or to the church. What you mentioned about the elders pushing the youth to the forefront of societies to undertake several tasks do exist in some of the communities. That exists in some of the communities in the Pacific. So it takes us back to what has been mentioned in the previous presentations, that those are some of the cultural norms that the church and us, we must challenge. But a volunteer is somebody to speak theologically, is somebody who sacrificially lay down his or her life for service of others, of the others. To me, that is a volunteer.
Thank you, Taltala. If I can sacrifice you on the altar of a very difficult question, one that is going around feed at the moment. COVID-19 vaccination and the mark of the beast. That is the being that's holding people back from being vaccinated at the moment. Please, a few words on that, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Nat.
I mean, it's one of the big things that's stopping people from being vaccinated at the moment.
Yes. No, education and knowledge is a key to to freeing up our societies. I think the social media plays a very vital role in holding our people back. I wrote to Reverend James Pakwan. I had a conversation with my mom, who's back in the village, and she heard from people who have access into social media, and I told her that. She asked me if I have already been vaccinated. I say yes, I'm waiting for my second one in June 23rd, and she started, rambling about 666, exactly what you mentioned. We need to understand that vaccination have nothing, for the people of the Pacific, I'm speaking to the Pacific audience, vaccination have nothing to do with the end of the world or 666. It's the way we interpret scripture, that what we call in theology eschatology, the doctrine of the ends of the world, and we treat the book of Revelation as an eschatological text, where in reality it's not. It's a book written for such a time as this, when people are suffering. So we need to, I urge the people of the Pacific to get vaccinated. It is sad also to see that some of our church leaders are behind, some of these, they have doubt, instead of leading people as leaders to go out and be vaccinated. This is not a time to discuss whether this is theologically wrong or not. This is a matter of life and death for our people. So we have health experts out there who work upon the shoulders of scientists everywhere in the world, who are all over the places trying to find cure for this. We put our trust in them. They are servants of God as well, who are called to work on this front. So there's no link, Nat, between the vaccination and 666. There's no link. We need to educate our people.
Thank you, Tartala, and we also thank the church leaders of the Pacific who have stepped forward to be vaccinated. In Fiji, the head of the Methodist Church, Reverend Ilibu Suwai, the head of the Anglican Church, Archbishop Freni Thama, and the head of the Catholic Church, Archbishop Peter Lloyd Chong, and also all the other church leaders throughout the Pacific. We're coming to the end of this session on the Met. I'll go around as we usually do for final words. Maureen, final thoughts?
Maybe just to say that I think the pandemic provides us also with an opportunity. I mean, we've spoken a lot about the many challenges and the problems that it has exposed, but I think it also provides opportunity. And I think the opportunity, we have to realize it and pretty quickly, because if we don't, we will go back to a way of being and thinking that it's going to solve the kinds of injustices that we've seen. So I think really just to emphasize Vani's point that this is a time where we have to complete a lot of the reweaving, rethinking, all the R's. We have to do it now. And we can only do it through collaboration and through working together. To change, to do any kind of transformative change, whether of any kind of system, whether it's economic or political system, will require civil society groups and working with governments, in this case, to change the kinds of structural injustices that we've been fighting for a very, very long time. We have a window, but it has to be in collaboration. And just to remind everyone that we talk about solidarity a lot. It's a verb. It's an acting, doing thing. And we have to move into solidarity to ensure peace in this part of the world. Otherwise, we'll still be enduring the injustices that we've been suffering for a very long time.
Thank you, Maureen, for reminding us that this is time to reunite and to revitalize it, to revive the region. Thank you. Sialia, final words from you?
Thank you, Netani. Thank you for inviting us to be in this space, and I think that's. I don't have anything else to add, but just reinforce the message brought out by Maureen. And this is something that I have seen myself. I'm new to the Pacific regional civil society space. But I have never seen collaborations among civil society in the region before, like now. And I think that has been a really good kind of approach. You asked me questions earlier about the dynamics of the civil society and governments in Fiji right now, Netani, and that's the sad part of it, because this is not the right time to have that kind of conversations when government needs civil society, at the same time, vice versa. And I think this is where we had learned from this pandemic how we need to listen to each other and accept that some of the things that we may be raising from civil society may not fit in well to a lot of people because it exposed the gaps of how things are being done in the past. And I'm hoping that this is also that opportunity for the churches to listen to civil society, listen to government, listen to the young people, and listen to others. And we had seen the vaccine hesitancy is bringing out a lot of questions around our education system because it's come down to how well informed our people in terms of making those choices. But at the same time, how does the church and all of us respond in terms of the fear that has an impact in how our citizens are making those difficult choices in terms of responsibility to themselves, but also keeping the others in their decisions. So other than that, nothing more but to talk about partnership in a real way, not just on paper, but how we work with each other, not just at the regional level, but also at our country level. Pinakanitani.
Partnerships. Thank you, Sialia. Another reword, relationships, which will be so important in our rehabilitation phase. Tartala, final blessing, words?
Gorngalot. Thank you, Nat. Yeah, some of the things that Reverend James and PCC mentioned in the concept that was sent out. We hope that these things are not covered in the shadow of the virus, the pandemic, and the political noise that's going around the Pacific and also here in Fiji. Things like climate change, deep sea mining, what our brother Reverend Wutawea talked about, the struggle of the people of Kaniki, West Papua, and Maui Nui for free determination. We hope that these issues that need our full support and attention are not sidelined during this time of pandemic, because it's going to take a while for us to get back to, let's say, normal. Some people don't like the term, let's say normal. So we hope that in the midst of all these, the pandemic and every other issues that we are talking about here tonight, these things are not covered in the shadow and then just do away with Tani. I think in terms of partnership, I thank Siale for raising that, the issue with the churches. I'm not saying the church is not doing anything. The church is doing a lot of good things. But then the issues that were raised are true. And the church must gut it up and admit that it needs changes. That's exactly what I do. The work that I do is to help the churches. And the message I tell the churches with regard to finance is, if you are a church minister, you are the preacher of the gospel and you're not an accountant. Give money to those who are trained to handle finances. So in terms of partnership, I think the church is always ready to partner, and the church should be more ready and willing to partner with civil society, not to be afraid. Sometimes our doctrines and our beliefs hold us back. The church should fight for justice everywhere. Injustice in any form, at home, in the society level, in the national level or globally, injustice in all its form is a sin against humanity and against God. So I think, Tani, that's my final thoughts. Literally, before I leave, I'm sitting on doing what I do best on Friday and Saturday evenings. So thank you again, Tani and James, for the invitation. Naka.
Thank you, Taltala. Joy, last one?
Yeah, but very quickly, apart from what everyone has highlighted around what COVID has brought, the opportunities, the need to reweave, redefine, reflect, reinvent, and our relationships. The current pandemic has, as what Maureen said, has really highlighted a failed system, systems that we really need to look at our way of operating, our way of living, our systems. And just wanted to draw it back to tonight's theme around justice and peace. In this time of COVID, I think the world needs love.
Thank you, Joy. Please don't forget to rehydrate as well. Peter, last words from you?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join in the discussion, to listen, to learn. And yes, I wholeheartedly agree with all of the participants. I just really wanted to highlight Reverend Kutiamunko's statement on muddying the church's hands for the work, and I think that's a really great analogy for our work in achieving a just justice. So yeah, thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Betty. And we can unashamed Catholic request for us to all be as Pope Francis wants us to be a church that smells poor and looks poor and gets muddy looking after the people. Thank you all for your contributions this evening. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I give you back to Reverend James Bhagwan to bring an end to these proceedings. Thank you.
Naka Netani, and thank you, Maureen, Joey, Siale Pete, and of course, Reverend Nico, our host with the most, Netani, for moderating this panel, this Talano on the Mat. Friends, this webinar is usually meant to go for 2 hours. But you know, in the Pacific, that's a relative time, And in our Talanos, we also take the time to talk about things rather than just having prepared statements that everybody reads from. And so I'm very grateful to the panelists tonight for sharing from their heart, from their experience, and for raising the issues that you have raised. From PCC, we have been working very closely with the people you see on the screen, with Pang, with Piango, as part of the Pacific Regional Non-Governmental Organization Alliance, the Pringo Alliance. We work very closely together, often behind the scenes, quietly doing our diplomacy, doing our work, and this is an opportunity to share what some of those, what that looks like, and that's why the call for partnership is there. I think this is also from PCC an opportunity for us to bring our friends into the conversation and share what everybody is working on. So those watching now and online later, you will be seeing more of these Talanoa. And as we continue to share what Piango or Pang and other partners are doing on their webinars and their Talanoas onto our page, just a reminder that this coming week, as you know, today is Environmental Day, World Environmental Day, and coming up on Tuesday is the World Oceans Day, the launch of the Decade for Ocean Science. We had the launch of the Decade for Restoring the Ecosystem today. Issues around deep sea mining, issues around the blue economy, issues around land extraction, things that we work in partnership with Pang and Piango and Young Solwara and other partners, including self-determination. So please do follow them on their social media to learn about things that we're doing. Our partnership for the Pacific Blue Line to say no to deep sea mining in our region. And there'll be those Talanoas happening throughout the week, as well as other issues from PCC on the ocean. We'll have a number of Talanoas and webinars every day this week or next week, focusing on the theme of the ocean. Please, if you have any more questions, you are welcome to get in touch with any of us. Our thanks to those who joined in the Zoom from the World Council of Churches, those who are part of the Pilgrimage for Justice and Peace, for asking your questions and sharing your thoughts with us today, those watching online, those who shared their stories to Bishop Jack Urame from Papua New Guinea, Vani from EFCOS, Reverend Sarah Bird from the Solomon Islands, and Reverend Billy Wetewea from Kanaki. Let me leave you with a fourfold Franciscan blessing that I would like to share with you. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and turn their pain to joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed rest of the weekend. Thank you for you giving up your Saturday night to join us and your Saturday morning in other parts of the world. God bless you all.